74 years ago, last week, the Jewish people across the world stopped and commemorated and celebrated the establishment of a Jewish homeland, a place where as Jews we could really call our true home. And this is something I've been thinking about the past few weeks. We have this idea that Moshe, the greatest leader of the Jewish people, had one request as he stood on the banks of the river Jordan. And he asked, all I'm asking of you, Hashem, I beg of you with every fiber of my being, let me come into the land of Israel. That's all he wanted. God's response to him is, Vayit'aber Hashem bi le'manchem. Enough, never speak to me about this matter again. God said no. And the question is why? Why was Moshe, our leader, denied this opportunity to enter the land of Israel? And there are a lot of answers to this question. But there is an incredible midrash that I came across that I want to share with you. The midrash says, in the name of Reb Levi, that Moshe in essence was turning to the master of the universe, and he says, I don't understand. The bones of Joseph are allowed to enter the land of Israel, and I won't be allowed to enter the land of Israel. What does God respond to him? He said something cryptic. The one who admits to his homeland, he'll be buried in the land of Israel. The one who admits to his land will not. The one who does not admit to his land will not be buried in the land of Israel. So where do we see this? So the Midrash explains, when the wife of Joseph's master in Egypt said, Re'ehu vilanu ivri, see that you brought us this Hebrew person, this Hebrew slave, Joseph didn't deny that description. And he says, ganavti me'eretz ha'ivrim, I was stolen away from the land of the Hebrews. Says the Midrash, Nikbar be'arzo. Therefore he was buried in the land of Israel. But when the daughters of Yitro, upon meeting Moshe for the very first time, turned to Yitro and they said, Ish mitzri hisilanu miyad haroim, this Egyptian man saved us from the hands of the shepherds. Moshe is standing by and he hears the conversation. Says the Midrash, Shomea v'shotek. He remains silent, and therefore he's not buried in the land of Israel. The great Hasidic master, Rav Meir Halstock, who was known as the Rebbe of Otshova, he asked the question, why were Moshe and Yosef equated? There's a massive difference between who these people were and their lives and their whole situation. Yosef is born in the land of Israel. He's taken from there and he's placed in Egypt. So when he says, I was stolen away from the land of the Hebrews, he's describing his life. He's describing his situation. Moshe wasn't born in Israel. Moshe was born in Egypt, and as a fugitive, he flees the land. He arrives in a place called Midian. So when the daughters of Yitro describe him as an Egyptian, that's who he was. It's accurate. So why should Moshe object? Why was he punished for not describing himself as an Ivri, as a Hebrew? So the Oshova Rebbe explains that when Abraham was commanded, Lech lecha me'artzecha el haaretz asher areka, go to from your land to the land that I will show you, go to the land of Israel. This mitzvah to live in the land of Israel was given to Abraham not only for him to observe, but for all generations to follow him as well. The land of Israel then became the homeland of the the nation of Israel. So the fact that the entire nation in the days of Moshe's youth lived in Egypt doesn't change this. You usually associate yourself with your true homeland, so wherever you are in the world. Moshe should not have considered himself an Egyptian. Yes, he was born there. Yes, he hasn't lived anywhere else, but Moshe should have felt so strongly in every part of his DNA about who he truly was, about what his true identity was, that he was from the land of the Ivrim, of the Hebrews, that when he was called an Egyptian, he should have said, hey, hang on one second, that's not who I am. And because he didn't do that, says the Midrash, he was not allowed to enter the land of Israel. Ben Gurion captures, I think, the source of this in a 1936 speech that he gave to the Peel Commission. He turned to them and he said, 300 years ago, there came to the New World a boat. Its name was the Mayflower. The Mayflower's landing on Plymouth Rock was one of the greatest historical events in the history of England, the history of America. But I'd like to ask any Englishman that's sitting here on the commission, what day did the Mayflower leave port? What date was it? I'd like to ask Americans, do they know what date the Mayflower left the port in England? How many people were on the boat? Who were their leaders? What food did they eat on that boat? No one could respond. But yet, more than 3,000 years ago, long before the Mayflower, our people left Egypt. And every Jew in the world, wherever he is, knows what day they left. He knows what food they ate. And we still eat that food every anniversary. We know who our leader was. And we sit down and tell the story to our children and grandchildren in order to guarantee that it will never be forgotten. And we have our two slogans. Now we may be a slave, but next year we'll be a free people. Now we are behind the Soviet Union in their prison. Now we're in Germany where Hitler's destroying us. Now we're scattered throughout the world, but next year we'll be in Jerusalem. There will come a day that will come home to Zion, to our home. That is the nature of the Jewish people. So I was thinking about this last week, that Yom HaTzmaut, many of us don't have that opportunity to live in the land of Israel. But the midrash is very telling, and is telling us a very important lesson, that we are not British or Spanish, we are not South African or Canadian. We are all, in the words of Yosef HaSadiq, of the great Joseph, Me'eretz HaIvrim, from the land of Hebrews, from the land of Israel. And that's something that we always have to be remembered.